Welcome to the Teacher Geek YouTube channel. Here we show teachers how to use technology with a purpose. Hello and welcome to my second video on Padlet. If you're new to Padlet and haven't used it before, be sure to go back and look at my introductory video on Padlet where I show you how to set it all up from scratch, what it can be used for, and show you how you can tie in some of the posts, make sure that they're not profane and things like that. This video I'm going to look at 5 of my ideas of how you might use Padlet in the classroom. There are many others, I'm sure, and if you have ideas that I haven't mentioned, feel free to post them in the comments, share them with the rest of the group, and at some point I can come back and look at the comments and make another video or simply add to this one. My 5 ideas are to use Padlet as a portfolio where you might get students to create a portfolio of evidence on Padlet and share that Padlet with you. You can also use it for curated content, so content that you as a teacher have gone through and you know is reliable and it's valid, so that when students go to do research, they're looking in a contained field, if you will. The third way is to use it for collaboration between students or as a Jigsaw Learning tool. The fourth is for peer evaluation, and the fifth is to use it as a presentation or a flipped learning tool where you let students do the lesson outside of the classroom using Padlet, and then they come in the classroom and then you do some of the application work and things like that. So what I'm going to do is go through each one of those, show you different ideas for how you might set it up, arrange the page, the settings you might choose, all of those sorts of things. Okay, the first use I'm going to show you is how to set Padlet up as a portfolio. And what I've done is had students create their own Padlet accounts and then come and share their portfolio Padlet with me once we've started working on the portfolio. That way I can come look at it at any time and do a portfolio check-in, things like that, so I can make sure that it's being worked on along the way, so we're not just waiting until the deadline and then I find out that it's not done. So the way you would have a student set that up, I find it most useful to use the shelf format. And the reason I like the shelf format is because when you come in, you can then add different columns, and so I can change the name of each column. And so let's say the first element of that is health and safety. If you teach a vocational subject or if it's in a workshop or something like that, let's say it's health and safety. Then I could do a column on personal protective equipment where perhaps they do a review of the personal protective equipment that's available. Maybe even they have to cost it out or whatever. For my trainee teachers, they have to provide evidence of observations. They have to provide evidence of lesson plans, that they've done the required number of hours of teaching, those sorts of things. The reason I like this is because it makes it really easy for me as a teacher to go back through and find the content that I'm expecting or the content that I have to mark. The other thing that I have students do in their settings is to make sure that they've turned comments on. So that way I can come in as a teacher and I can comment on any post that they've made. So if it's good or if there's something missing, I can add a comment there as well. I've also made sure that when they share it with me, that the privacy is set to can write, so that I can add posts there. So at the end of each column, I can add my own post where I write a brief paragraph or a few sentences around what is on there, what kind of content is there. And the nice thing about columns is, one, you can see that I can add a comment here on any post, but I can also move content between columns. And if I drag and drop the content from a file folder, it's just going to ask me which column do I want to put it in. Really useful and a great way to make sure that the portfolio is being worked on along the way before the deadline, so you know students are on the right track. It's also really organized. You don't have to worry about things getting lost, or I've had cases of students losing the entire portfolio right before the deadline and then having to redo it. Because it's on Padlet and it's shared with me, I don't have to worry about that. The second way that you might use Padlet is as curated content. And for example, if I wanted students to go out and do research on the Holocaust, I want to make sure that they're going to find good quality content, that they're not going to find the Holocaust deniers and then write about that. So if I was setting up a Padlet for that, one of the ways I like to do it is to just set it up as a wall. So the content can end up anywhere spread out across the Padlet. And this means, because it's a little less organized and there's just content everywhere, means students actually have to search through it. They may not use it all, but at least this way I know what they are using is good stuff. So if I just take this link to the Holocaust Museum here and I put that in, and then I could put a description in there, whatever. Let's say I also wanted to make sure that they had a couple of videos to access, so I want them to have that content as well. So I can just, again, copy that link, click somewhere else on my Padlet, paste the link in, and it's up. And again, this way I know that the videos they're using, the websites they're looking at, the articles they're looking at, the journals they're looking at is all good content. The third way you might use Padlet is for collaboration, or what I call jigsaw learning. If we start with basic collaboration, where perhaps you have two students working on the same project, it doesn't necessarily matter which format they choose, depends on the nature of the project. And it may be quite useful for them to use something like a canvas, where they can draw connections between different ideas. So on Canvas, I can take all of these posts, move them to wherever I want, and then I can start to draw connections between them. So if I just click connect to a post, I can add a label to it. Hit connect, and now we have this line between the two posts. So we can see the flow of ideas coming back and forth and how the project perhaps they're working on is being developed. So we might start with this source and then move on to that source, whatever it is. And it's really easy to connect between those ideas. So you could use this for a collaborative mind map in this case, something like that. I often also use this collaborative style for what I call jigsaw learning. And if I come back to changing that format to shelf, this is the most useful one, I think, for jigsaw learning, but there are plenty of other ways you could do it. So I could then name each column. So I could have group 1, group 2, and so on. One of the ways that I've used this most commonly is, for example, when I taught the American Civil Rights Movement, students might get a question where they had to answer, to what extent did the presidents of the United States improve the lives of African Americans between 1945 and 1960? Well, if they knew what the presidents of the US did during that period, great. But that's only about a quarter of the question, because they need to compare it to what Congress did. They need to compare it to what the Supreme Court did. They need to compare that to what individuals did. So what I would do is I'd break the class up into 4 fairly large groups. And I said, okay, group 1, you're going to look at the role of individuals like Martin Luther King and A. Philip Randolph and so on. Group 2, you're going to look at the role of Congress. So you're going to look at the 1965 Civil Rights Act, or 64 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and so on. Group 3, you're going to look at the Supreme Court. So you're going to look at Brown versus the Board of Education, and so on. Group 4, you're going to look at the presidents. Post everything you find in your column with clear explanations and how it relates to the ultimate question. And by the end of a session, what I'd find is that I'd have 1 page full of really good content and evidence to support the question, the crux of the question, that the presidents had an impact, but also to be able to compare it to the other 4 areas. And this way you had content where students could tackle that question from any angle. To what extent did Congress improve the lives of African Americans during that same period? So that way, by the end of the session, we've got a range of evidence that the whole class can use, can search through, can revise from, and so on. That's Jigsaw Learning. You could also do this with flip chart exercises. So if you had 3, 4, 5 groups all doing a mind map, a whiteboard, or a flip chart paper or poster project, they can take pictures of what they're doing, post it up onto the Padlet, and then they can comment on each other's or see each other's. And again, you may find it really easy or really useful to do that in a Canvas style or in a grid style. The 4th way that you might use Padlet is for peer evaluation. And I've seen this used really well in a lot of art classes, particularly photography, where the teacher will set up a Padlet. Generally, I believe they'll use a standard wallpaper format. So just the standard wall format or grid format, and then send students out to go take photographs of their work, or in this case, actual photography based on a brief they were given at the beginning of the session. So they might look at a particular style of photography and then go away and do it. Then toward the end of the session, they all come back, see each other's work up on the Padlet, and spend 5-10 minutes looking through it, and they can comment. How might you improve this? Oh, this is a really interesting angle you've taken, or whatever that might be. And that works really well for the self and peer evaluation and peer support within the group. Number of different ways you can do this. You could do this with presentations. You could do this even with essays that students just, once they've all finished their essays, you say, okay, now everybody's written them, so you're not going to copy from each other. Post them up, and you have to comment on at least one other person's essay and give some feedback before then you as a teacher do the same. So using it for peer evaluation, really effective. The 5th way that you might use Padlet is as a presentation tool or for flipped learning. So I've seen this done a number of ways where students create their own Padlet for a individual or group presentation where they literally do the presentation from the Padlet itself. You've got videos up here, we've got a PowerPoint up here, we can open it all and it becomes almost like a digital poster presentation. But you can do that as a teacher as well and use it as a flipped learning where students do the lesson outside of class. They watch the videos, they do the exercises, whatever it might be. They go through the PowerPoint, all of it outside of lesson, and then they come back into class and they write the essay or they do the practice paper. So really good way to do that because you can very easily add all of the content. You can label each element of the content as you go. So what I will do is say things like start here. So first look at this video and this presentation, and then maybe I can link to a Google Forms quiz so that I can do a final assessment. So finish here and do this quiz. Number of different ways you can do that, but you will want to make sure that depending on what you're doing, you change the settings in your share so that the privacy is right. So if you want students to make a comment on something, leave it as can write. But often, if it's a flipped lesson, what you want is can read. And then you do the assessment through something like Google Forms. But if the assessment is upload a paragraph about this topic, then you'll want to leave it as can write. And again, you may find a more organized version of this in terms of format quite useful, where you have one entire column on your shelf where students submit their work. So those are 5 of my ideas of how you might use it. You can see that I haven't even touched some of the other formats. So you could use any of those ideas, and some of the other formats might fit better. You could have students do a presentation in timeline format, for example. If you've got any other ideas that I haven't covered, like I said, just leave them in the comments and I can come back and we can take a closer look at those various setups. Padlet is such a versatile tool because it can get used in so many completely different ways. So here are my 5 ideas. Take them and run. See how many you can use them, which ones worked for you, which ones didn't, and leave a comment below. Thanks very much for watching.